use your first and last name as a username, and you may change it once you log in using the rename option. You can turn on the camera if it's possible for a more engaging session. Feel completely free to do so. All the participants will be automatically muted and will only be allowed to unmute themselves once the host allows it. If you would like to speak, you may use the raise hand option or the chat option to ask an urgent question or make a comment. And feel free to raise your hand while we are discussing certain topics. But we will also have a Q&A session or Q&A section at the end. So I will let Salwa and Dr. Sam introduce themselves. So Salwa, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi. I just want to say there's like a bunch of names with my name, and I think it's because of the link that I sent. So it's not me on different accounts. Just want to make that clear. But anyway, feel free to change the name. So my name is Salwa. I recently just self-published my poetry book, and it's a very spiritually faith-based collection. This is the book, actually, in case some people have not seen it yet. So there's 3 themes: faith, love, and death. And yeah, I guess I could say that it's a documentation of, my experiences growing up, split into those 3 themes. And yeah, I found my passion of, writing poetry through studying journalism at Northwestern University in Qatar. And I think it's because I fell in love with the idea of storytelling. And then that kind of sparked my interest to tell my own stories through poetic form. So yeah, that's just a brief overview.
Thank you, Salwa. Dr. Sam, go ahead. Tell us about yourself, please.
Hi, my name's Sam. I am also a poet and writer. I teach writing and creative writing at Northwestern University in Qatar. And I am the founder and co-host of a open mic night in Qatar, which I will find an opportunity to promote a little bit later on in this session if possible, which is called Outspoken Doha.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I'll start, Salwa, you told us about your book. I would love to hear more about what inspired you to write it, and when did your love for poetry start? So what gave you the idea to compile your poetry and put it in a book?
Yeah, so I guess I could say that I started writing because I didn't feel understood a lot of the time. I mean, I had all these emotions built up inside of me over the years. And, some people would go to the gym to de-stress or go out with friends. But for me, I found comfort in writing, and I found comfort in, stringing words together to make meaning of what I was going through. So I needed healing, and I was able to find that through writing. So now it's kind of like my coping mechanism for all the, all the emotions that come through me. And I feel it's a place where I feel like my emotions are valid. No one can tell me how to feel or what I should and shouldn't feel. It's kind of a safe space where I'm able to be vulnerable, and I'm able to not, keep that emotion buried inside of me. And then going back to, why did I then kind of decide to compile it and put it into a book? And it's because I wanted to share that vulnerability with people around me. I feel like a lot of us grow up feeling isolated and not feeling like we belong anywhere or we can relate. And I wanted to offer that safe space through a book. We're so busy, when we grow up, we're so busy, talking about other people's stories that we forget to find the beauty and value in our own story and speaking our truth and sharing that with everyone. We undermine, I guess I could say we undermine what we have to offer. And I wish that more people were able to find value in themselves and to share that with others. It's not easy being vulnerable, but especially in a world where so much of that is taken away and so much is left behind closed doors. But yeah, I think I never intended it to become a book. I just started writing for me, and it was kind of healing for me. But then once I decided that it would be a good idea for me to collect them all together and share it, I then took the steps towards achieving that. And I owe a big thank you to my mom because she would always give me journals growing up and tell me to write my goals down. And I hated goal setting, to be honest, because I'd convinced myself that I couldn't achieve my goal before I had even written it down. So it was a very negative way of thinking. And I didn't understand why my mom would always sit me down and tell me, like, Salwa, write your goals. But look where it led to me now. It led to now. So I'm forever grateful for that. So thanks, Mama.
Thank you for sharing that. I'd love to also learn more about you, about the different themes that you have within the book. So what are like, why did you choose these different themes? Can you tell us more about them?
Yeah, for sure. So there's 3 themes of the book: faith, love, and death. And kind of think of it as a life cycle that we go through. You know, we're born and faith is planted within us. But over time, we become neglectful and blinded of that faith. And then as we grow up, we come to experience and understand love in all its forms, but then love can be blinding as well. And then you learn about spiritual love. And then towards the end, we experience death, and we perceive death as the end, when in actuality, it's the beginning of eternity. But it's those 3 phases that we go through. And I put those 3 themes because I feel like no matter who you are, whichever walk of life you come from, we all go through these 3 experiences. And we become so desensitized and blinded by these 3 things that I realized we end up going through life being numb. So these 3 main experiences, faith, love, and death, we should embrace them and, you know, take advantage of how beautiful they can be. But because we become so desensitized by them, we walk through these 3 stages so feeling so numb. And they have so much to offer, but we shun away from that. And so I found people all around me kind of unwilling to live life. And I wanted to change that. I wanted to turn that narrative around. And we convince ourselves we don't have the tools to navigate these 3 things, but we really do. And I wanted to offer a safe space where we can be vulnerable, where we should embrace these 3 parts of our life cycle. And yeah.
Very interesting. My first interpretation when I saw the book, when I got the book from you, and of course, we'll talk about self-publishing in a bit, but I really love how you wrote the book, printed it, and started distributing it to your friends through your Instagram. So you did not wait a lot of time to get published by a publishing house, because you wanted to get your poetry and work out there. So, but my first interpretation is that these 3 elements of life, or 3 themes, they are like a life cycle. We're always thinking about them. We're always questioning our faith, love, and we're questioning death. And of course, we see it around us. So before I go to Dr. Sam, I want you to tell us, like, how did you publish your book?
Yeah, so it was a very overwhelming experience, because I've never self-published anything. I didn't know anything about the process. You know, I had a lot to learn, but I was willing to, you know, put the effort in to find out how to do it and where to go. But the main goal of why I chose to self-publish was because my main goal was to get this project that I had was to get it out as soon as possible. That was my main goal. And so the quickest way to achieve that for me was through self-publishing. And the reason that was my main goal, because a lot of people were like, well, you know, you could have waited and went with a publishing house, you know, they would have helped with the marketing, the book would have been sold all over the world, you know, it would have been able to reach a lot of people, but the process that takes a long, long time. And the reason I wanted to finish this as quick as possible was because I have a history of, you know, having all these ideas, but never actually following through. I'd have all these things that I'd want to start, but I'd never end up following them. So I was tired of disappointing myself over and over and never holding myself accountable. And so I realized you don't have to be someone famous to self-publish. You can be a very ordinary person. You don't have to have a big following, and you can still, take your goal into your own hands and self-publish. So I decided to just do it, and I printed a batch here in Qatar for the people here who wanted to buy it, and then I also put it on Amazon. And those were for the people who were like international. So yeah, it's important to take self-development into your own hands and not wait for someone to give you permission to do it. It's important to actualize your own potential without needing someone to validate that for you. And that's why I find a lot of self-growth with self-publishing and a lot to learn. And I wanted to be a part of the whole creative process. I wanted to be a part of designing the cover, a part of, the type of paper that I'm going to use, the platform I'm going to put it on, the editing process. I wanted to be involved in all of it. So I think self-publishing really helps give you that.
That's really inspiring. And I really love that because it applies on other art forms as well. So for example, for me, I really enjoy like creating filmmaking and creating short movies of like either traveling or random thoughts that I have. So there's always two ways. Either you reach out to a like publishing, an external publishing source, or self-publishing. Especially I think social media and like the internet is giving us like the ability to do that like easily. Yeah, that is really inspiring, and I hope people here in today's session, I hope they feel inspired as well. If you have any art form or any different work that you have, it's very motivating to hear that Salwa's story and like the way that you can actually go ahead and self-publish it. Dr. Sam, I want to ask you first, so since we're talking about self-publishing and also going to a publishing house, can you tell us, for example, the benefits of each and the downside of each? How can they be different? Are there like instances where going to a house, a publishing house is more needed, or is it okay to always go ahead with self-publishing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of debate you hear about between self-publishing and traditional publishing. At the end of the day, it's a bit like saying, shall I go in my car or travel by train or travel by bus? The different methods, but they get you to the same destination in the end. And that's the kind of key thing, getting the work out there and communicating with the world, whether you've done it via this vehicle or tool or the other one. I think, traditionally, people have liked the idea of traditional publishing because of the things Salwa mentioned. They have power behind them, an audience already, often publishing houses, to distribute books too. They can distribute books to bookshops. I mean, that's one of the big things that they're able to do that is difficult with self-publishing. But on the other hand, we live in an age where we're stuck at home a lot, especially in this pandemic age. Many of us get our books or read our materials, online, or source them from Amazon, as Salwa mentioned, rather than heading to bookshops. So it's not such a big draw. The downside of traditional publishing is, as Salwa mentioned, it takes a long time. One reason for that is there's often a lot of back and forth with editors asking for changes, checking through proofreading, typesetting, all of those kind of things. When I last published a book, a novel, between signing a contract with the publishing house and actually getting the physical book was just over a year, 13 months. So it's a huge amount of time. And by the time that's gone by, you've kind of moved on and you're doing different things. So you don't get the opportunity to be saying, okay, this is right now, this is happening to me. But I mean, the other thing is, you know, for people considering one or the other, you know, I think Salma makes a very good point when she says about, you know, it's important for self-development to get up and do things. And I think that's important, as you mentioned, Raja, not just for poetry, not just for writing, not just for any art form, filmmaking, whatever it may be, but anything you kind of want in your life or you're passionate about or you want to do for your career. You know, I think people have this expectation sometimes, okay, I've written a story or a set of poems or a book, whatever it may be, and okay, that's the big work done, but you have to actually get out there and, you know, bring it into the world in some way. And you know, that's the key. You need to think, how am I gonna do it? Whether that's sending out to competitions, to publishing houses, whether that's, as Sal was done, creating your own book and, you know, distributing it that way. The goal is to communicate that with the world and to say, you know, here it is.
Absolutely. I had a question. So this self-publishing can be applied to creative writing and this type of ideas that we want to, like, that we have and we want to share and communicate with others. But for example, when it comes to academia or academic writing, or for example, if I wrote a journal or an article, is there a way to self-publish that? And is it does that, like, is that an option also in all types of creative writing, or does it only apply to creative?
No, I think it's increasingly the fact that all spheres really are opening themselves up to different modes of communication. You know, academic writing, for example, you want to write an essay, you want to get your ideas out there. Traditionally, people have said, well, it needs to be peer reviewed, which means other people who are experts in this area need to read through it before it can be published. And there is obviously a value in that if you're writing, you know, about elephants, you want to have someone who's an expert in elephants checking that. But at the same time, I think people are realizing that for academic writing, as much as for creative writing, having this kind of system works as kind of gatekeepers very often. And what happens as a result of that is that a lot of the academic material that's published, and in the past, a lot of creative writing that's published, tends to favor the same old voices or the same old styles. And I think there's increasing voices saying, well, if we want to encourage a diverse range of voices, of perspectives, then you can't have the same old gatekeepers saying we only want this style or we only want this kind of thing, you know, because all of these need to be opened up to, you know, a range of voices from a range of backgrounds, a range of perspectives. So there are ways, but I think for academic writing, it's very much the beginning of that, whereas creative writing, people have been talking about that for a few years, and I think self-publishing now is such a well-known thing that there's none of the same kind of debate that there is in terms of things like essays or academic writing, where people are still fighting about this whole peer review issue.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. And I also want to ask you, you mentioned that you published a book previously. Can you tell us an idea about the book, or several books if you did? We would love to know more.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I published a volume of poetry many years ago now, you know, kind of my mid-20s. Yeah, and I wanted to say this because it's the same, you know, it reminded me of the thing Sal was saying. You know, what happened to me, I studied creative writing for my master's degree. And as a result of that, with other master's students, I was going to readings in the city I was in, Edinburgh, in the UK. I was going to open mic nights. I was going to a lot of spoken word events, and I was reading my work there and seeing how audiences reacted to it. And that's how I ended up making the contacts that I made, that I ended up getting offered a publishing contract for my volume of poetry, and it's actually for that reason that myself and a colleague at Qatar University set up Outspoken Doha, which is a monthly spoken word event in Qatar at the moment via Zoom, because there are not as many opportunities in a city like Doha, even though it's the population is huge and growing, and there's so many people interested in so many different art forms, not just writing, but so many others. But there are a limited number of means of expression. It's, as far as I know, only one other regular kind of spoken word open mic night, which is Words and Strings, another great one, with the goal of getting people to have that opportunity to try out sharing their poems, because it's one thing writing a poem and another thing gifting it into the world and sharing it with people, and I was very lucky that was my path to publication. But it's very hard to find a path to publication or connect with other people who might be writing if there aren't events out there. So that's why I set it up, and I encourage all of you here today to check it out on Instagram, outspoken_Doha. That little I told you I'd be doing a little bit of promotion for that event. But after that, that was my poetry book. After that, I've written a couple of novels as well. My most recent book that I mentioned was a novel called The Afterlives of Dr. Gachet, which is about the story of an old man in a painting by Vincent van Gogh. And we know a lot about Vincent van Gogh. There's many books about him, but there are not any books, apart from mine so far, that imagine the life of this guy that he painted.
Amazing. Thank you for telling us. I think it's very interesting, like how you saw that there are very few platforms here for creatives, such as like the open mic events. Like there's only a few of them in Qatar. So I want to talk more about the initiatives that are available here and the impact that you noticed after launching Outspoken Doha.
Yeah, I mean, this surprises me really, because my experience in Qatar, I've been living there for close to 10 years. I worked at Qatar University originally, as you know, Raja, and then I worked at Northwestern. And so I've met a huge number of students, as well as, colleagues and other people passing through. And I've seen such a huge amount of creativity, not just writing, but, filmmaking, art, photography, visual design, animation. It's so many people with all these talents. And so I've been surprised that there are not many initiatives or many events where these can be more showcased. You've got big local events, you've got the kind of Doha Book Fair, but that tends to be people who are at a much later stage in their career, already having published a book. But for the people who have just created something, just made something and want to share it, or more importantly, want to test it out, in a kind of low stakes, more, friendly way, no pressure, there wasn't much. There's Words and Strings, which is a monthly event which, as you can tell from the title, involves music as well as words, people reading poems, and also people playing instruments, performing songs, and Outspoken. We created Outspoken so that people could just turn up. There's no sign up, we don't vet anyone, we don't say, okay, send us what you got and we're going to judge who's good enough to perform. Literally anyone who comes along can read something, and we're all there to listen and enjoy it together, and often offer a bit of feedback, encouragement, or ideas to help people along. And I think it's great so far. We've got some regulars that we always see each month, but we've also got new faces every time we have a session, especially over Zoom. where it's so easy to just kind of click and join in from your own bedroom or living room or wherever you are.
Amazing. Yeah. I think I saw the first event by Outspoken, and I really liked how it was very casual and it was hosted in a cafe. And I think since a lot of people, they go to cafes to meet people, and it's really, it was really amazing. Like personally, I enjoyed it so much because there were a lot of like-minded creatives, and there were a lot of conversations going on there. So I think building a platform or just organizing a time and a place where people can meet at the same time and just share their ideas and creativity together, that's absolutely needed. And with more, with meeting other creative people, ideas just keep improving, and like there's more ideas that come to life. But also I'm concerned. I remember the first event. There were mostly poets, and there was poetry there. So how did it expand after that? Are there other art forms? I'd love to know.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few other art forms, but they're all text-based. So we've had a few guest readers, so people who have published something, who have read. We've had, someone reading from their memoir that they've written about their own life. We've had someone, a thriller writer who writes spy thrillers, writing. We've had, poets. We've had poets as readers writing both poetry in English and reading that, and in Arabic and reading that. So we've got a huge range of things. We had one short story writer as well. So there's been a range of things. It's all text-based. I'd be interested to think about how maybe it could expand to other art forms as well. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential, and we're kind of open to anything, that is a means of creative expression, of expressing yourself. People want to try something new and test it out. It's a kind of great testing ground.
Amazing. I'd love to know, Salwa, have you participated in one of the events that have like such a platform where you could share your poetry with others? And if yes, did it impact you in any way?
Yeah, so actually in the Flutter community, I actually signed up for Words and Strings for one event, but then they were fully booked, so I never actually ended up doing it. But I did do one university event. I think it was a Palestine open mic, and I performed my first ever poem there, and it was very nerve-wracking. It was my first time ever sharing any form of my poetry to people. This was before I even started posting on my own page. And yeah, it was quite an experience. I mean, I was very nervous, but I do find value in sharing your work, whether that's verbally or even if it's through a screen. I'm actually surprised by the amount of people that are able to resonate, because I grew up thinking we're all so different and that no one really gets me. But in the end, we're all human, and you'd find that all of our emotions are universal. So what I'm going through or what I'm feeling is exactly what the person in front of me is feeling. But we grow up thinking we can't share that, or it's not worthy enough to share. And so I actually learned a lot through sharing my poetry, and I'm glad I took that step, because I feel like I've kind of built a little community, and with people that I haven't even met, strangers that I haven't even met, who are able to resonate with me. And I think that's, I guess, beautiful that I was able to achieve that. But yeah, I definitely have yet to explore like doing more events in person. I'm actually doing one now later after this on Instagram through a live. So, I'm trying to put more effort into like, reaching out and like doing these performances so I can grow as well.
Wonderful. Did you notice any like difference between the virtual versions of these events, the outspoken events, or and between the physical? So what is the difference that you noticed? Because I know you participated in one virtual event as well.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I would be less nervous when it was through a screen, but that's not the case. The nerves still come regardless. I think, you know, being able to see people, being able to do it in person, you get to see people's energy. You get to take that all in and embrace that. You know, you're facing your audience. Through a book, I put that on a piece of paper and people are reading that personally. It's them in the page. I'm not there. So I don't get to see that emotion or that experience that they go through. So I find, and through a screen, obviously, you know, you see people's comments and stuff, but you don't get to see how that impacted them personally firsthand. So I'd say I prefer in person just because I have a more personal interaction with my audience. But yeah, I value both. They both have, you know, benefits to give.
Great. Yeah, definitely. I think both of them, I personally think both of them are great platforms to share ideas. The core and the value of sharing knowledge and creativity is still there. But hopefully we can go back to physical events here. It's been a while. Like I really missed meeting a lot of people and discussing even like random topics and talking about how we can collaborate. It creates a great space for collaboration. But also, Salwa, I want to go back to talking about your book. I want to know what, from the three themes that you had, which one was your favorite, and which one did you feel that you basically poured all your emotions in?
So I definitely think that all of the themes, it's hard for me to pick because I think that all of the themes they're all so vulnerable. They're all a part of me on a piece of page, whether it was faith, love, or death. But I think the death theme is integral to the book, personally, because it fascinated me how death is so real and so close, but so many people around me weren't thinking about it. They were like, it was like an afterthought. It's like, we'll think about death later. I don't have to worry about it right now. And because we've become so desensitized by death, because all over our screen, we just see death every single day. You know, you wake up, you hear about a death, you sleep, you hear about a death. While you're sleeping, there are people dying. And so death was everywhere. But at the same time, we were living our life as if it was nowhere in sight. Like, this, it's fine. I have tomorrow, I have next week. Death won't come, but it will. So it fascinated me, the way we think about death and the way we've come to think about it. And also the depths of pain that come with death. There's so much to unravel. And there's so much beauty and wisdom that arises from pain and teachings of death. And I found it beautiful that the impact of your presence can transcend your lifespan. So even though your body is no longer here, you can still live through the emotion or the connection that you gave to someone else. And so I see this book as a sort of bridge and a connection between me and the reader that I've able to establish without me having to meet them or speak to them. And so like I'd always ask myself, like, when, you know, I spent most of my life having all these goals, but not actually taking the steps to achieve them, I'm like, okay, like, am I waiting to live or am I waiting to die at this point? Like, you know, and I think a lot of us go through that struggle. It's like, we feel so useless most of the time. And then we're like, well, am I actually living life or am I just waiting to die at this point? Because, you know, and so whichever answer you choose, it's a very different perspective or outcome of life that you end up living. And the problem I realized with that question is that waiting shouldn't have even been in that question. Why was I waiting? Waiting for what? And so I realized that death is the sole meaning that gives meaning to this life. And it's the gateway from an end to another beginning. And so it was an integral theme for the book because it was an integral part of how I choose to live every day. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We have Fatima Rizwan in the chat. She said, in a way, death is an integral part of what gives life meaning. Um, thank you. Thank you, Fatima, for sharing. And I would also like to remind our audience, if you have any questions or anything that you would like to say, feel free to raise your hand, unmute. You can share your ideas or ask a question. I would love to talk to both of you, Salwa and Sam. How do you think COVID or lockdown, like, how did it impact your work? Salwa, I know you wrote the book during, like, you started writing, I think, in the beginning of lockdown. You can tell us more, but I'd love to know, how did staying at home impact you? Did it motivate you, or do you have more time? Yeah.
Yeah, so lockdown, actually, I'm so grateful for lockdown because it resulted in me doing this. I actually, had the idea to actually put my poems in a book towards the end of lockdown when things were starting to open again. And I was so frustrated with myself. I was like, I had all these months, like I could have worked on it, and now I'm coming towards the end wanting to like do this just when, things are starting to open up. I'm starting to get a bit more busy. So I was annoyed at myself, but at the same time, like everything happens at the right time. But I think lockdown and quarantine just helped so many of us actually, think about what is important, what actually, it was a big awakening. I had my spiritual awakening during lockdown. And so that's why I'm very grateful for that. It made me realize a lot of things, and I had time to reflect. A lot of the time I wouldn't like reflecting because I didn't really see any point of it. I couldn't see myself growing, I guess, because I had convinced myself that I would always stay the same. And so I think this lockdown gave me the opportunity to see beyond that and to see that, everyone has the potential to change. Everyone has something to offer. And all I had to do was literally take the steps towards achieving that. So yeah, that's how it helped me personally.
Yes. Thank you for sharing, Salwa. Dr. Sam, can you tell us, how did lockdown impact your creativity, your teaching, everything that basically that you enjoy doing?
All right. I
Yeah.
unmuted myself to reply to a question in the chat, and then I wasn't able to unmute myself. Yeah, the challenges of lockdown, for me, at first I was thinking, okay, I got a lot more time to write and to do a lot of things. But, I agree with Salwa in that, I think a lot of us faced some of our lowest ebbs in lockdown. And I think, when you talk about spiritual awakening, I think we kind of forced to look inside ourselves a lot because of fewer distractions and fewer things we were able to do. So, I mean, on the one hand, it's a very difficult thing to do with, but on the other hand, it can prompt you to reflect, and writing's great for that. There's some poems or pieces of writing where you know exactly what you're going to do, and you know what it's going to look like, and you know what you want to communicate when you start writing, and it's about reaching that goal. But there's other times and other bits of writing, stories or poems, where you don't know you don't know how it's going to end, and you learn something about yourself through doing it, through that journey. And that's, why I'd encourage anyone to, have a go at writing poems, writing anything really, because I think you do discover something about yourself. You do learn something through that process, and oftentimes you end up with a good poem. But even if you end up with a bad poem or a terrible poem, it doesn't really matter, because you've got something out of that.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, like a lot of the time when I wrote my poems, like they started off really bad and I had to be okay with allowing myself to write, and I would perceive it as something boring or not as beautiful as it could be. And so it's important for it to get to beautiful, it has to start off ugly, or it has to start off boring or dull. And so just trust the process in your writing. It doesn't have to be perfect when you first put it on page, and it won't be perfect. And if you leave the page blank, it'll always stay blank. But if you force yourself to just write something down, you give it the time and effort that you'd give to someone else, give it to your writing, and you'll slowly see that it becomes just as beautiful as the mind that came up with it. So I think that's important.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Thank you both for sharing. Yeah, I think lockdown definitely impacted us creatively, mentally, in all aspects of life. I'd love to read some questions in the chat. I think we're around the end of the session. We'll open it for Q&A, but also I'd love to remind the audience that you can ask to unmute. We would love to hear you and hear your question. But we can go ahead and read the questions. So the first question is from, sorry, I'm just scrolling.
I think someone also has their hands up as well.
All right, let me check. Yes, so Fatima Rizwan has her hand raised. I'll ask you to unmute.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Selva. It's so great hearing you in person. I've actually been following some of your work, the ones that you did post on Instagram. Haven't had a chance to grab the book yet, but I will soon. But when I was reading it, I think it's so wonderful that the three themes that you talk about, you live with them constantly in your daily life. But I see every time I read something, it's this little impact that a writer is able to make with the reader, that you stop and start to really think and ponder over the moments that you're living, and you start to experience them more beautifully than you really do. It might just be a routinely thing, just living or breathing or having faith, but then you read something about it and you start to think that it's a beautiful thing that you have. But what I was more even fascinated about was the title of the book, Carry Me With You. So I just wanted to know, what was that process like, and how did you come up with that name? Did you feel that all those three themes are not just essential for life, but also essential in just, helping us move along?
Yeah, thank you for your question. It's a great question. I actually, surprisingly, the title of the book was the first thing that I came up with before I even figured out what my themes were. And I actually came up with the title of the book years ago, but it was so far back in my mind. I never actually thought that I would actually put my poems into a book. But that name somehow stuck with me those years, and I had it written down somewhere, and I found it. But for sure, I think that faith, love, and death definitely fit within that title, Carry Me With You. I think I learned to appreciate the title, I think, once it came out, because I realized how much it was kind of, it was the message of the book. I had made, writing the book, I was always, praying, like, I hope that this book helps someone. I hope that someone feels seen, someone feels understood reading this. And I think that the title beautifully kind of captures that regardless of what you're going through, faith, love, and death are three ideas in your mind that you should always keep within you, and you should embrace them, and you should find the beauty in them. And especially when, Islam is so misunderstood in today's world, when a lot of people don't seem to be, intact with their faith and their spirituality, we become blinded by love, as I mentioned earlier. We forget to appreciate these things that are right in front of us. And so I think they're so valuable. And literally also the other day, my friend, she had posted a few pages of my book, and it led to a conversation. And she was like, I literally carry the book everywhere with me. And it was such a surreal moment for me, because I was like, this is exactly the title. It reflected the title. And that was the goal of the book, was I want these people to carry these pages with them, to not forget how valuable they are to the people around them. And all the messages I have in the book, I wanted them to, impact someone. And so I'm grateful that the name of the book ended up being that, because, it literally manifested itself into reality. So yeah.
Wonderful. Perfect. If anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand, but I will go ahead and read Shivi's question. And this question, I believe it's for both of you, Sam and Selwa. What does literary success look to you?
Sam, do you want to go ahead or me?
Yeah, I mean, I think literary success means finding the readers that the book is meant for. You know, I've written a couple of different things, poems. You know, this novel about painting. Before that, I wrote a novel about the person's life story in China, a person that I knew. And you know, they've all been quite different, and they've had different readers. And I think literary success is finding the people that read it and then say, oh yeah, that really connected with me. Because it's not going to be everybody at the end of the day. It'd be great if it was, and you know, each book could, you know, make millions and so on and so on. But yeah, it's finding, it's making that connection, finding the people that for whom the writing moves them, and they find something of value in it for themselves, and you make that connection through the words, through the story or the poem or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, success in our world today seems to be people define it in a very linear manner. It's like, well, how many books did you sell? How much money did you make? And for me, that was never how I defined success, which is why I never attached my success to numbers. Literally my intention, it's so important to always reset your intention. My intention was to help someone with this book, even if it was just one person. And that's why I would never be disappointed, regardless of how many sales I have or not have, because that's never where I based my success upon. And so I think it's, as Sam said, I think it's important, like, did you connect with the reader? Was the reader able to understand you? Were you true with yourself? I mean, before we even think about how this is perceived by others, how do you perceive it by yourself? Did you honor your experiences? Did you truly tell what's, you know, all the emotions built inside you? And when you're vulnerable and you stay true to yourself and it reflects who you are as a person, you'll never go wrong. And yeah, so I think that's the most important thing. Yep. Kareem said, being a good writer is 3% talent, 90% not being distracted by the internet. I think I agree with that, because I think everyone has something to offer, and we are so quick to undermine our skills. And, you know, if you asked me years back, like if I would ever have written poetry, I probably would have said no, because I would never thought that I was good enough. But everyone has something to offer. And even if your work doesn't really resonate with a group of people, you'll always find a group of people that it does resonate with. So yeah, I think that's important. And also not to attach your worth to success, because you're worthy before when no one likes your work, and you're just as worthy after when everyone seems to like your work. And I wish I told myself that, you know, before I had even published this book, when I was, you know, always putting myself down, or I never thought that I, you know, had what it takes. Like, I was worthy before, even if I didn't publish this book, I'm still worthy as a person, and I should still appreciate myself. And I think everyone should do that. So yeah.
I just wanted to piggyback off what Salwa said, because yeah, I do agree with it. You know, poetry has, I think, a misunderstood reputation. People think, oh, poems are this outdated art form from long ago, or people think, well, I can't write poetry, I'm not a poet, I'm not that type of person, or oh, if I write a poem, it's going to have to rhyme, or it's going to have to be like this, that, or the other. And all of those things are completely untrue. You know, all you need to have is a language that you speak, which we all do already have as adults, and a perspective of your own, which we all do have, and those are literally the only two things. And all the other rules you can bend and play with and do whatever you want. I mean, there's literally something for everyone, and everyone can experiment and do their own thing. There's no such thing as people who are poets and
yeah,
people who are not.
Yeah, no, thank you for pointing that out, because definitely, like, you know, when I studied, you know, I did IB literature, and there was a segment about poetry. And I never actually liked poetry when I was studying it in school, because I was like, there's so many rules. I don't understand. It took so long for me to actually understand what the poet or the writer was actually trying to say. Like, it was this big puzzle piece, and I couldn't understand it because it was so, I don't know, it was just the way they wrote, I just couldn't understand. And so I think, Sam, thank you for saying that like definitely, no matter which form of art you do, whether it's writing, whether it's poetry, whether it's painting, there's no rules. Like, you can bend the rules, you can make it your own, personalize it to something that you find value in. And that's why when I wrote my poems, I'd never actually stuck to any rules. You know, like in a sonnet, you have to like have certain lines that rhyme, and like one line has to have this many syllables or whatever it is. I never actually, you know, paid any attention to that, because my poetry wasn't the goal of it, to like write a sonnet or write, you know, free form. It was just putting my emotions into the best way that I thought was, you know, understandable and easily read by myself and the reader. So yeah.
Thank you both for sharing. I'd love to go through a couple of questions in the chat before we finish for today. This is for Salwa. How did you consider releasing your book through a publisher? And why did you ultimately choose to self-publish? And I would also add to this question, Shivi's question, what did you edit out of this book?
Wait, so what was the first part? Why did I choose to self-publish?
Yes, did you consider releasing your book through a publisher?
Okay.
Why did you choose self-publishing? And what did you edit out from?
Yeah, so I had always had in mind that I was going to self-publish, because, as I said, my main goal was to get this out as soon as possible. And the longer that I waited, the longer I was scared that I would never finish the goal that I had in mind. Definitely for future books, you know, I might think about, you know, going to a publisher. I know my mom was like, she wanted me to go through, you know, HBKU Publishing Press. And I was like, no, Mom, it's going to take too long. Like, you know, they're going to, because it was such a personal documentation of my journey in my life. You know, I didn't want it to go through this, you know, rigorous editing process. I didn't want people to tell me what I should include and what I shouldn't include. I wanted to be the decision. I wanted to be the one that makes that decision. So that's ultimately why I went through self-publishing. Did self-publishing, but there's no right or wrong. It depends on what your goal is. Is your goal to, you know, sell books around the world? Is that your main goal? Then, and you want someone to do the marketing for you, then going through a publishing house is the way to go. If your goal is, you know, to keep it, you know, personal, to get it out as quick as possible, I definitely recommend self-publishing. You're not losing anything. You actually learn a lot of the process because you're involved in the whole process from the idea until it's actually printed, and it's quite amazing how much I know about paper now. It's like kind of weird, but I know, like, you know, the different types of paper, the thickness, you learn so many things that you wouldn't even expected to learn. So that's for that question. And then what did I edit out of the book? It was actually really hard for me to figure out how many poems I wanted in the book, and what I wanted to include and what I didn't want to include. Actually, I'll show you the contents page of my book because I kept changing the numbers. So this is the contents page. Because I kept trying to change the amount of poems I had in the book, I had to keep reshuffling the amount of like windows I had in this arch. But ultimately I have 49 poems, and there's a gap in the middle because I decided not to have 50. And yeah, it was just, in the end, I didn't focus on the number, because, you know, it started off as 46 and then it went to 48 and then it was like over 50. And then, you know, it always changed. But in the end, I was like, I took out what I didn't feel, you know, perfectly, I guess, described my experience, or I felt like that needed more time because I was on a time constraint. I left those poems to work on later on for, you know, if I do a future poetry book. So I edited out those lines or those poems that I didn't feel, you know, truly honored my journey. And that doesn't mean that I hate those poems. I still have just as much appreciation for those poems. I just need to, that they needed more time. So yeah.
Amazing. I would love to end it with one last question. Did you feel that the process for writing poems differs from writing narratives such as short stories and novels? This is a question from Sabika, and I would love to hear both of your answers. Doctor, you can go ahead.
Sure. For me, it does. Yeah. I mean, I think everyone who writes whatever we're writing, emails, academic papers, poems, stories, has a different process. And I think one thing that is vital to learn is what your own process is and how you work best, because it's not going to be the same as someone else's process. But for my process, yeah, it's very different. For me, writing a whole novel, something that's 200, 300 pages, or even a short story, you are relying on those kind of structural tools of storytelling that we kind of either explicitly learn or that we've kind of implicitly got from consuming so many movies and TV shows and books ourselves, that we kind of have at the back of our minds. All those tools to kind of keep a reader going, keep them drawing in, keep reminding them of the plot and the structure. For a poem, you don't need that so much. There's an immediacy right there on the page, and you can get kind of straight to the heart of the matter. You don't have to keep reminding the reader of things or keep setting up, for the second act or the third act. You can get right in there. So the process is, for me, about kind of drilling down for a poem and, what's the essential thing to, have right there on the page.
Yeah, I would agree as well. I mean, I feel like with narratives and novels, they're much bigger and much longer. You have characters, you have a plot, you have a climax, you have the ending. And poems don't need that. You're the character. If you're writing from your perspective, you're the character and you're just sharing your truth. And, you don't have to, create a character unless you're writing about, an observation that you had. But that doesn't mean that, writing novels or short stories, that they can't be poetic in their own way. I'm actually reading a book right now called Mornings in Janine, and the way she writes is so poetic and it's so beautiful. And I was just kind of like mesmerized by the way she writes, because, she could have taken different pages and created short little poems from, the way she writes. And she writes so, eloquently and so poetically. And so definitely I feel like, it can be a poem, but that doesn't mean that poetry can't weave its way through short stories and novels. And, you can be poetic regardless. You can be poetic through a painting. You can be poetic through a drawing. I think it's a very abstract thing that you can incorporate in different parts of your life. And I think that's what's beautiful about what poetry has to offer.
Thanks to both of you for the great insight. Thank you to our audience for the amazing questions. And thank you for sticking in for the whole session. If you would like, thank you so much, Salwa. Thank you, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being a great host.
Thank you so much. To know about our next sessions, you can visit our Instagram, Qatar Reads, and check out Dr. Sam's open mic initiative that is at outspoken_Doha. And also to purchase Salwa's book, you can reach out to her on Instagram, and it's also available on Amazon. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you guys for being engaged as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So goodbye, everyone, and we'll see you in our next sessions.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.